1 in 30 was not a good hit rate. And so I said to myself, what can I do to make this a more efficient process and reach the customers that really want to play and sell my music? And I had noticed one thing about my calling.
Welcome to GMP, the Great, Glorious, and Glamorous, the Going North podcast, where authors from around the world help you realize that success is tangible. You'll leave with at least one new piece of inspiration or information to help you keep going north. Now let's get on with the show. Today's episode is sponsored by the GoingNorthPodcast.com shop. And we got some new designs on the website, baby. That's right. Check out the new designs. We got 2 new designs. One is outread your competition to outlead your competition. And the other one is perfection is completion, but excellence is exceeding expectations. Because when you feel like something's perfect, it's truly not. But when you seek excellence, you are after exceeding the expectations of the folks you serve and your past self. So head over to GoingNorthPodcast.com.shop and pick up some more magical gear in multiple forms in more ways than one. Now let's get on with the show. And today on the Highlight Reel Builder for Authors, known as the Going North Podcast, we got another super special, awesome human for you today. That's right, indeed. For those remember the early start of this podcast, it was originally going to be about independent musicians and wonderful books I like to read. Well, today's guest, my goodness, we'll be getting more of those this year, like a combination of both, because today's guest in particular has over 40 years, you heard that right, folks, 40 years of experience in music as an entrepreneur who's been building a successful business with virtually no advertising, creating a worldwide following, generating over 50,000, you heard that right, folks, 50,000 personal notes and letters of support for his wonderful music. And he's an Amazon best-selling author as well as a photographer as well. So let's give it up for Mr. DC. And we ain't talking about the comics, but we're talking about the delightful and cheerful David Combs. How you doing today, Dave?
Dom, I am doing great. And thank you for that warm introduction. And we're just going to have a warm and lively and fun introduction and fun conversation. That's for sure.
It's like you're a musical scientist here. One of your greatest hits was actually just you messing around with the piano, I hear.
That's the way it all started. You know, sometimes I think a lot of the creations in this world happen either by accident or just messing around and something. Well, my first song was just me sitting down at the piano and just playing something that came to me. And lo and behold, what came to me ended up being a song that's been played now millions of times around the world. You just never know.
My goodness, so what inspired your love for music, my man? Were you like in the womb with the metaphorical piano from the spirit, or like how'd that even happen, man?
Both my parents love music. Yeah, I suppose I probably did hear some music when I was in the womb. I don't remember it exactly, but I'm sure there was an influence there somewhere. My mom and dad both played the piano. My mom could read music. She could play out of the hymnal, and my dad, he learned from his mother how to play the piano by ear. He could sit down. He didn't need a book anything to play by. He'd just sit down and play the old rugged cross. He'd just tear loose on that thing all over the piano keys, everywhere. And his mother, my Granny Combs, was born in 1894. She was about 4'8", tiny little lady, but she was a fireball. She could make some music, and she loved to play the instrument of an old pump organ. Now, this is before electricity. She could play the old pump organ in church. And then her favorite instrument is one that I love because I have her instrument right here with me. She gave me this instrument when she passed away. In the box that it came in was a note that said, "This harp belongs to David Combs," and signed Granny Estelle Combs. That's my granny. I have so many wonderful memories, Dom, of going to Granny's house. And one of the first things she'd ask me to do is she'd hand me this auto harp and she'd say, "David, would you tune up my auto harp for me?" And I'd say, "Sure, Granny." And she'd hand me the key that you used to tighten up the strings. And then I'd get it in real good tune and I'd hand it back to her. And then she'd sit that thing in her lap and she'd, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." And she could just make that thing talk. And so I have so wonderful memories of my childhood being around Granny and her playing that auto harp and singing all those favorite hymns that she used to sing. I got my life started off real early around music. I guess the love of music has just stuck with me.
That is a wonderful story. And that's a wonderful legacy right there of your grandmother, man.
This auto harp's older than I am, obviously, and I wouldn't take anything for it. It's just a treasure heirloom for me.
Let's hope it continues to get passed down for generations to come. It's wonderful that it still plays, too, after, oh my goodness, hundreds of years.
I'd say it may be close to over 100 years old now, because she was like 94 when she passed away, and 1989, I think, is when she died. That's been 33 years ago, something like that. It's got some age on it.
There we go. Got the season, as some say, right?
It's well seasoned now. It's very mature. Some might say, they're looking at me, that I have reached some maturity as well, maybe in looks, but sometimes I feel like a teenager, and my wife says sometimes I act like one. I'm still a kind of a prankster and a jokester at heart, and if somebody has some fun to do, I'm likely to jump right in the middle of it and help them join in and doing it. I have so many interests, but music is my main interest at this point. I've been so blessed to write over 120 songs and record over 170 for 14 albums over the past 40 years. And that music blessed so many people, and the feedback, like you said, I've got over 50,000 letters and notes from people. Boxes. You should see my basement, the floor over there. It's got, put them on top of my pool table one last winter to see how many they were. You couldn't even tell there was a pool table underneath it. I mean, there was just boxes stacked full of these letters. And you get them out and read them, you better get your box of Kleenex out too. Some of them will tug at your heartstrings. They're really touching letters. And those letters are kind of one of the primary motivations for me to write that book that those of you watching can see on my left shoulder here. It's just been a wonderful thing to pass on some of these wonderful stories. Plus, it's encouraging and motivating to me. When you read somebody that tells you something fantastic that you've done, you don't even know that person, and all you did was give them the gift of the music or allowed them to use it. That's powerful stuff. It's great. It's confirming. It's affirming that you're doing the right thing. Sometimes in life, you need, whatever you're doing, you need somebody to pat you on the back and say, hey, Dave, you're doing the right thing. Just keep at it. And some of those pats on the back came from some of those letters that I got in the mail every day that said, Dave, you're doing the right thing. You touched my life, and I want to thank you for it. It's amazing.
That's right, indeed. Probably double amazing indeed. That wonderful key to, or should I say, the fountain of youth that you have with this wonderful music and writing all those wonderful songs and recording them. What led you to decide to put pen to paper to write an actual book for folks to not only read, but also to listen to, since it's also an audio form?
I've been telling these stories like we're talking about today to people. You know, I'll do a program at Rotary or some club or something and tell some of these stories, and then sit down at the piano and play Rachel's song, play a little bit of music. Every time I would do that, people would say, hey, Dave, you ought to write a book. Those are great stories. You ought to write a book. Well, that's been going on for years. Guess what? The pandemic hit us all about February or March of 2 years ago. And after that, here we are at home. Can't go out, can't go visit relatives, can't go out to eat. What are you going to do? Then we get introduced to, well, there's Zoom. Well, at least we can Zoom with people like we are doing right now. My wife says, those stories that you've been talking about and all these great notes, stories that people have sent to you, you need to write that book. And now you're at home. You don't have anything else you have to do. Just sit down and start writing your book. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And one of the first things that I did was I wanted to know how's the best way to write a book. I knew I couldn't do it all by myself. I reached out to get some help. I reached out to a man by the name of Steve Harrison, who has a group that helps people write books. And then he introduced me to Jack Canfield. Now, everybody knows Jack Canfield. He's the co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. Through Steve, I got introduced to Jack, and I got invited to participate in one of Jack's, he calls it a mastermind retreat. It was just a handful of people, and we had to do it by Zoom. We couldn't do it in person like they used to, but we did it by Zoom. Spent 3 days with Jack, 10 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night on Zoom. In that process, Jack got to know me and my music. he loved my music. Rachel's song in particular, he just flipped out over that song. And he loved my stories. He said, Dave, your stories are great. And I had already written up some of them that he was reading preliminary. And he says, Dave, you're a good writer. Well, I'm not sure anybody had ever told me. Certainly nobody of his caliber had ever told me that I was a good writer. Well, that was encouraging. At the end of the retreat, I jokingly said to Jack, I said, well, if I write this book, will you write the foreword to it for me? And he kind of leaned back and he said, well, Dave, you write it first, and then we'll see.
There you go.
Well, he wasn't going to sign up until he saw what I had. Well, I did write it up and sent him the final manuscript. Guess whose name's at the top of my book? Foreword by Jack Canfield. I am so honored that he saw the value in my book and agreed to write the foreword to my book, which he did. So that was wonderful. The motivation for all of this was certainly the stories that I'd been telling, the people encouraging me to write a book. Of course, the encouragement of my wife, Linda. She said, you really need to get this done. And then, of course, the notes and letters from thousands of people and the encouragement from Jack and the other people that I got to help me with it. It was a team effort, but it has been really, really good. I've gotten great feedback from the book and people that either listen to it on Audible. And by the way, I'm the narrator on the Audible. If you like to listen to me talk in my Southern accent, well, you can do that for 8 hours listening to my book. Anyway, that's how the book came about, and it's doing well. And main thing with the book is I want the people to associate that with my music and to spread the peace and happiness and stress reduction around the world through my music. And before I forget it, you and I have a mutual 2-person apart friend, and that is in John Maxwell. John Maxwell is a very good friend of my friend, Nito Cobain. Nito is the president of High Point University, and Nito and John Maxwell are best friends as well. I saw that connection with you with John Maxwell, and I thought, I got to mention that because he's written some wonderful books that on leadership and life in general. He's a great author and a great teacher, so I know you're delighted to be affiliated with John Maxwell.
You can say that again because it's so true. And my goodness, like Nito Cobain. Probably need to get him on the show too because he's a legend as well. And my goodness, kudos to you, Dave, for getting Jack to write the foreword to your book because that is definitely a huge honor. That's definitely a huge honor. You get to be one of the folks that said, hey, Mr. JC himself, the wonderful Canfield, wrote the foreword to this book, baby. He was touched by the music.
He was. And Nito Cobain wrote an endorsement on the back of my book. I've got him on the back. Anyhow, we're blessed to be able to have this get together today and talk about things that are inspiring and uplifting. That's my goal with these podcasts, is to say something or encourage somebody to go listen to my music and be inspired and raised up with the music and hopefully get a benefit out of what I've said or what my music has said to them in their heart.
Good deal indeed, and you're doing just that. Since my man's been, I guess, around close to 100 podcasts these past 6 months, you probably been asked so many questions. Is there a question that you wish you would be asked more often?
The question I most often ask is, how did Rachel's song come about and what did you do with it? And that is an interesting story, and I, of course, tell all the details about that in the book. But basically, it's just, it had its beginnings when I was 33 years old. I had not written a song until then, sat down at my piano and just played this music, which later got named Rachel's Song. And my wife recognized that it was a new song. I didn't even think of it as having written a song. She says, what's the name of this song I've had stuck in my head? And I said, she hummed it, and I said, whoa, it's just something I made up. That's the first time that I'd really thought about that as a brand new song. She had me write it down on a piece of paper. So I did, because she said, if something happens to you, that song would be gone. And she didn't want that to happen. She said, write it down. So I did. And this is the actual piece of paper I wrote it down on. For those watching this, you can see that it's nothing but a piece of music manuscript with the melody notes written out and the chords right above it. C, A minor, D7, D minor 7th, and so forth. With copyright David M. Combs, 1981. That's when I wrote it. So I wrote this down and put it in my piano bench. That was 81. In 1983, some good friends of ours had a baby girl named Rachel. And to make a long story short, I played this song at the end of Rachel's christening service. I had not planned to do it, but there happened to be a grand piano there at the church. I took advantage of that at the end of the service and said, can I play this song now in honor of Rachel? And of course, the family said yes. And then the rest is history. I played it, named it Rachel's Song in her honor, and that's how it got its name. Quickly, I rolled the calendar forward 3 more years to 1986. I'm working with AT&T Western Electric in Nashville, Tennessee. And in Nashville, Tennessee, it's everything music. It's Music City, USA, as you know. And my wife encouraged me to get a demo recording made of Rachel's Song. Went out one evening after work, and I went driving through Nashville downtown at Music Square, which is 2 square blocks of everything music, Country Music Hall of Fame and the old RCA studios that you could tour, lots of things like that. Found a studio, got a recommendation from an engineer of a musician to arrange and perform my demo for me, and a recommendation for a studio. The musician's name was Gary Prim, P-R-I-M, Gary Prim. Got to remember that name, because after recording the demo of Rachel's Song, we went back and recorded over 170 different songs over the years, 14 albums worth of music. That was in 1986 when it got recorded as a demo, just for fun. And I tell people that ask, how could anybody get any song that they've written recorded? Well, it's very simple. If you're willing to pay, and it's not an outrageous amount of money, but it's not cheap either, you can find a musician in a studio that will record a demo of a song you've written. Well, that's what happened to me. But the version of it that came out of that process, which is the actual song that's when you hear Rachel's Song today, what you're hearing is that original demo recording. Hadn't been changed, no re-editing, no remastering, nothing. That is what I heard that evening in 1986 in that little tiny studio that I got it recorded in with Gary. The recording of the song was kind of the beginning of the realization on my part that I needed to do something with this song broader than me. I got it played on a local radio station here, on FM station, and it almost went viral. The radio station's phone bank lit up with callers, and they ended up having to play that song every hour, every day for probably the next year. You couldn't turn on the radio for an hour and not hear Rachel's Song. And the station manager told me that I needed to do something more with this song, because he said, I've never seen anything like this. I got busy. I called radio stations all over the country. One of them was right where you are in Baltimore. I remember the easy listening station in Baltimore was one of my favorite stations that played Rachel's Song all the time. They played it in Atlanta. They played it in Los Angeles and Chicago, New York, all over the place. It became a charted number 1 or number 2 on the charts in the instrumental music category. It began to take on a life of its own. And I started getting something I'd never got before, and that's fan mail. People were tracking me down by the address on the recording, send me a letter telling me how much they loved my music and how can I buy a copy of it, and when are you going to write some more? It's all, they love what you're doing now, but what are you going to do for me next, right? Always. I realized that I had something that was of real value emotionally and physically to the people that were listening to it, but also I realized, being a business person, I have my MBA from Wake Forest University. I'm a business guy. I realized there's a possible business model here that might, if I do this right, lead to me being able to make a living with my music. I wrote more music, got more albums produced, and I had to decide, how am I going to sell my music? To make a living, you got to sell something. The record stores back then, where you went to buy music, they didn't want to carry my music at all. They were only interested in big names of country and rock and roll and jazz and classical, all those genres of music. Mine was instrumental piano music. It just didn't quite fit in any of those big hot categories. I didn't get anywhere with that. I'd like to say that it was my idea of what I ended up with, how it worked, but it happened quite by accident. Maybe it wasn't really by accident, but it wasn't my idea anyway. I was working at AT&T in Bethesda, Maryland, and the lady whose office was right next to mine had a best friend who owned a gift shop in Old Town Alexandria. Now, I'm sure you've been to Old Town on King Street, lots of restaurants and shops and everything. Well, her friend owned a shop, and you may even have been in the shop that's still around someplace. It's called America. They sell everything patriotic, red, white, and blue, and whatever. It's a great shop that sells Americana. Her friend Jane owned this shop, and Leslie says, I want to give her a copy of Rachel's song to play in her store. You know, she plays CDs of patriotic music on John Philip Sousa, got a great sound system. And she said, I want her to hear this Rachel's song and play it. I gave her a CD, and she gave it to Jane, the owner of the store. A couple of days later, I'm sitting there in Bethesda, Maryland at my office, and the phone rings, and it's Jane from this gift shop. And she introduces herself, and she says, Dave, I got a problem. I said, really? the CD break or what? She says, no. She said, every time I play that song in my shop, everybody in here that's a customer wants to buy it. She said, they want to take it home with them. And I don't have any. I said, well, we can kind of remedy that. So we reached an agreement on I'd never even sold any at retail before. I didn't even know what wholesale price to put on it. She helped me with that. And so we agreed on the wholesale, and the retail was, I think, $14 to $15 for a CD. She said, can you bring me some tonight? I said, well, yeah, after work, I'll box you some up. And so sure enough, Linda and I took a box of CDs and cassettes down to Old Town Alexandria that night, gave them to Jane to sell in her shop. Okay, that was great. Had no idea what was going to happen, Dom. It was just one of those things where you just do it and you think, well, we'll see. 2 days later, phone rings again, and it's Jane. And she says, Dave, I got another problem. She said, those are all gone, and I need some more. I said, okay. So that night, we boxed up. And she says, double the order, by the way. Send me twice as many. So I boxed them up, took them to her. And Linda and I made that trip from Bethesda, Maryland, down to Old Town Alexandria every week for over a year. Jane sold thousands of tapes and CDs in that one little gift shop. And she was making a lot of money from the sales of my CDs and cassette tapes. And I was making a pretty good amount from it. It was kind of a splitting the profit there. And I said, okay, I made me a spreadsheet. I keep pretty meticulous records of everything that happened. I kept records of all this. Made me a spreadsheet, Dom. Here's how many tapes and CDs she's sold. Here's how much she paid me for each one of them. Here's how much it cost me to buy them, the manufacturing cost of a CD and a tape. You multiply all that out, and the bottom line is what my gross profit is for that particular enterprise. Now that's one column of a spreadsheet, and it's certainly a positive number, and it's a pretty attractive number. The gross profit margin was very, very good. I said, being the business person I am and the entrepreneur mindset, I said, okay, what if I had one gift shop like that in all 50 states? Just 50. So you make another column on your spreadsheet, 50 times the first column. Down at the bottom line is gross profit number. 50 times a pretty good number. It was a real good number. Now, let's not get greedy, but let's say that I had 5 gift shops in every state. There's 50 states. It's a big country. 5 times 50 is 250. So let's do column 3 is 250 times column 1. And the computer does the math, of course, just like that. And I said, Linda, come here and look at this number. You got to see this. She comes over and we both, our mouths are wide open. See that? That's more than twice what I make at AT&T. Wow. I know what I've got to get busy doing. I got to go find me 249 gift shops like that America gift shop. So that's exactly what I embarked upon. I was still working at AT&T during the day, so I couldn't do any of this at daytime. Night times and on the weekends, Linda and I spent going out and trying to find gift shops. We'd travel to Occoquan, Virginia, or to Newmarket, Maryland, or actually around little places around Ellicott City, Maryland. You're probably familiar with that little town. Tourist town. It's a lot of shops. And sure enough, all these little tourist towns that we went to, they would I'd give them a copy of Rachel's song. They'd play it. They love it. Next thing I know, I got another customer. It grew organically that way. And we would do that every weekend. Well, after a while, I ran out of territory that we could comfortably go to. Out about maybe 75 miles, that's probably the limit that you could really comfortably go on a weekend for prospecting. We call this shoe leather marketing. You're out there on the sidewalk, walking the sidewalks, trying to prospect. Linda says, well, you got to get on the phone, and you got to do this by telephone. I said, okay, well, how am I going to do that? I don't even know where the gift shops are, but we lived in the Potomac, Maryland area. I go down to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., across from the Capitol, They had a room of nothing but phone books. Now you're going to chuckle at this. Today, that I don't even think they probably even have a room with these, because what purpose would they have? Back then, it was a physical phone book. And they had everyone in the entire country in this room, by alphabetical order, by state and town. I go down to the Library of Congress, and I go to the Yellow Pages and get the gift shop listings for a bunch of towns and make a Xerox copy of them, take that home. Now, on the weekends, I sit there on the phone and I start calling. Somebody answer the phone, I'll say, do you sell any tapes or cassette or CDs of the music that you play in your shop? Some of them would say, well, we don't even play music. And I said, well, thank you very much, and then hang up. And some would say, yeah, well, we play music, but we don't sell it. And then I would launch into a conversation about, well, do any of your customers ever ask about it or whatever? And if they indicated any kind of interest in maybe even considering selling the music, I'd get their address and name and send them a sample copy and a letter and whatever. And some of those would become customers. And then very rarely I'd find one that did sell. It was a real rarity back then that actually sold the music. But I would have to make, Dom, 30 phone calls to get one prospect. I mean, that was a lot of phone calling. I'd start at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning with my Yellow Page copy listings, and I would call till 6 o'clock at night when my voice would give out. And when you're talking on the phone or any place all day long, after a while your voice gets tired. Mine may even sound a little tired now after talking all day. But anyway, I made so many phone calls, Dom, that my phone bill came in a box the size of a shoebox. Back then, they printed every little call you made on a sheet of paper, and it came in a shoebox size box. It's a good thing I worked for AT&T to get a little discount on my long distance. And they charge long distance, by the way, too. If you weren't in a local phone call, you were paying so much per tenth of a minute for that phone call. 1 in 30 was not a good hit rate. I said to myself, what can I do to make this a more efficient process and reach the customers that really want to play and sell my music? And I had noticed one thing about my calling. I had really good success when I was calling places that I later found out were tourist towns, places like a Gatlinburg, Tennessee, or a Blowing Rock, North Carolina, those little tiny towns around Baltimore that you go out, the tourists go to, and just on a weekend and just walk through the streets with gift shops. I was having really good luck when I would call one of them, like one in every 2 or 3 calls. I said, I've got to stop calling these places that it's 1 in 30. Yeah, that's just a waste of time. I think I know how to do this. It has to be a tourist town. How would I know where a tourist town is? Well, surely the Chamber of Commerce or Better Business Bureau or the state chamber would have a list to tell me. If I call West Virginia, hey, West Virginia, give me a list of your tourist towns. Nobody had such a list. They didn't even thought about making a list of tourist towns. They almost laughed at me. And even the National Department of Commerce, they didn't have anything like that either. I got nowhere with that. But I am a math major, physics minor, MBA person, and a computer programmer. IT and technology has been my life. I can figure this out. This is back before I even knew what big data and data analytics meant. I just knew that there had to be a way to calculate this. What 2 pieces of data can you think of that you might need to know about a tourist town? Number 1, how many gift shops are in that town? Like a Gatlinburg, Tennessee, let's see. You count them down in the Yellow Pages, whatever, there might have been 85 or even 100 gift shops. A lot of them. And the second thing you would need to know is, what's the permanent population of the town? How many people live there year round? Now, how do you get that number? The Census Bureau should have all that number. And I thought, well, so I know the numbers are there somewhere. And one thing I've learned, and I think it's still true today, if you need to know some information about and where to go get it and whatever, perfect place to go ask is the public library. Go ask a librarian. I see that smile on your face. You know, these librarians are wonderful people. If you ask them a question, they won't just brush you off. They'll either tell you the answer if they know it right off the top of the head. They'll find out for you. They don't just stop. They are excellent at researching and knowing stuff. Just so happens that the public library was across the street from my office in Bethesda, Maryland. One day at lunch, I go across the street to the library and I said, how can I find the population of all these little towns I need to look up? And she says, I've got just the thing for you. And she took me over to this table that had a book on it. I've got to bring it up here because this is the actual book. And it is a book called The Rand McNally Commercial Atlas Marketing Guide. This book weighs 12 pounds. I weighed it. It's about 1.5 inches thick. It has inside of it pages that are detailed maps of every state with all kinds of every little crossroad in there. But guess what's in the back of this book? It just now popped open to North Carolina. It has a listing of every little crossroad in that state and their census population, by golly. What I did was I said, okay, now I need to get all of the gift shops in the country on some kind of a printout where I can count for towns how many gift shops they have. I found out back then I could purchase a mailing list of all the gift shops in the entire country from the Yellow Pages company. And it cost me, I think it was $125, or it might even been more than that, to buy this mailing list. It came on a computer printout about 4 inches thick, about the 15-inch wide paper with the green stripes on it. And it had every gift shop in the entire country, all 75,000 of them, alphabetical, within town, within state. Perfect. Now I had the data I needed. I spent days in the evenings and weekends going through that printout, counting the number of gift shops in every little town in the country. And I made me a spreadsheet, another spreadsheet. Apparently I live on spreadsheets. I made me one, and I had the name of the town, how many gift shops were in it, and then I'd go to this book and look up what the population was. And then the third piece of data I let the computer calculate, and that's the ratio of population per gift shop. How many people per gift shop in that little town? Well, if you go to like Gatlinburg, Tennessee, the ratio would be a real small number because of 85 gift shops in a population of 2,700 people. There ain't no way in the world that 2,700 people can support 85 gift shops. The customers have to come from out of town. And that, my friend, is the definition of a tourist town. I did that work, and it took me weeks to get that done on my computer. But when I finished, and I had the computer sort that spreadsheet by that ratio, the lowest number at the top. And guess what? For every state, that lowest number at the top was guaranteed to be a tourist town. Tennessee, it was Gatlinburg, Tennessee. North Carolina, it was Blowing Rock, North Carolina. Occoquan, Virginia, right at the top. And Newmarket, Maryland, and Ellicott City, Maryland, right at the top of the list. So I knew it worked. I had listings for Wyoming and Kansas, places that I had never even been in my life. I didn't have to go. I knew that those at the top were tourist towns. And I had the phone numbers and names from this printout that I bought. All I had to do was pick, okay, here's the town, go to that page. Then I started on Saturday morning calling at 10 o'clock. About 1 out of every 3, 4, or 5 phone calls was a potential customer. And I went, Dom, from just a handful of customers of gift shops to over 1,000 gift shops over the entire country. And that is what enabled me to quit my job at AT&T in 1992 and do my music from that point on full time. Now, I know that was kind of a long story, but that's how I got from working part-time to being able to work full-time in my music business, but using my music and a little bit of analytics and data and connecting some dots and thinking outside the box.
That's definitely powerful right there, and especially that strategy. It's a really good strategy, a darn good strategy, and it worked out wonders for you, sounds like.
Oh, it did. Absolutely.
My goodness, so it's been, I guess, almost close to 40 years since Rachel's song was actually copyrighted. I'm sure Rachel's grown up by now, so how does she feel about knowing that song's named after her?
She has always loved that song. When she was a little girl, she would, when her parents would play it in the house, she'd go around and say, "That's my song." She's a beautiful young woman now, and I have protected her privacy all these years. There's a lot of crazy people in this world. I keep her as an anonymous person, but she is a real person. But I'm sure she loves to hear that song when she does.
That's what I'm talking about. And amen for protecting the privacy, too. Got some idiots out there. And it feels like they've multiplied.
They're kind of like little baby rabbits or something. The next thing you know, you got a whole slew of them around. Not a good situation.
Oh, man, but I know what's good is this wonderful book of yours. So, my goodness, so if the wonderful book Touched by the Music was a food item, what would it be and why?
I'm not sure whether it's going to be an appetizer or a dessert or maybe even the main course. It has a little bit of everything in it. It might be a 7-course meal, actually. If you're an entrepreneur, there's a menu item in there for you. You can read through the stories and relate my experience with my entrepreneur journey to your journey as well. Of course, there's inspiration about music in there. If you love music, of course, you can't help but go and listen to the music and hopefully enjoy that. And then if you like to read really inspiring stories that are really heartwarming and touching, I've devoted one whole chapter in there, chapter 21, to reprinting 22 pages of these wonderful little stories that were sent to me. And you better get your box of Kleenex out on that one, because some of those stories are real tearjerkers. When they came in the mail, my office manager, I always knew she would bring to my desk a stack of letters. Some of those letters would have paper clipped to them a Kleenex. So I knew that when I read that letter, I better be prepared to shed a tear or two, because people really, I couldn't believe that they did this, but poured out their heart and soul to me about the music and their very personal situations that they had encountered where the music touched them or got them through something. It is really, really special.
That's what I'm talking about indeed. So 7-course meal, y'all. That's right indeed. You don't need to wait for Thanksgiving, baby. It's right here in this book.
And it's not a turkey either. There's some real meat in this one. This is like the lady at the Wendy's commercial. Where's the beef? Well, the beef's right in here.
Speaking of beef, we're coming down to the magical question that every guest gets to receive, and that is, if you're to wake up tomorrow and you're at 25 again, but you're in 2022 with all of your knowledge and experience, what advice would you give to yourself?
I think I would tell myself to get out of bed, get over to that piano and write some music, because I've missed out on about, if I'm 25, let's say, I've missed out on 8 years before that of writing music. It was 33 when I wrote Rachel's song. 25, I'd have an 8-year start on that, advising myself to use my talents and recognize my gifts earlier in life would be a good thing, because when you're young and you're enthusiastic and you're really trying to make a go of it in your career in life, sometimes you are so busy trying to get yourself ahead that you don't stop and look around and think about where you are and who you are and what gifts you are, and think about a little longer range view of life rather than just the next week or the next paycheck or whatever. Take a longer look at life. But I think recognizing your talents and your gifts early in life is very important, and to feed those and nourish those and make them as positive as you can. And I know you're a huge Toastmasters person, and I remember going to Toastmasters when I was a young person, and it was a great way to begin growing as a person. I can remember that first time you ever in the I know you've experienced this thousands of times, for somebody new coming to Toastmasters, that first time to get up and give a extemporaneous talk about a subject that you just were told 5 seconds ago, talk about this, scares you to death. I mean, how am I going to do that? Well, today I wouldn't even think twice about it. Neither would you. It comes with practice. You need, whatever your gifts are, whether it's public speaking and even speaking even to your own internal groups or whatever, that's a skill that you need to hone, because communication in today's world is a really valuable asset to have. So learning that skill through Toastmasters for you and for me was a great thing. I'm glad that I did that back when I was probably 25 years old, like you said. But the musical part of it, I'm still a little puzzled as why it took me till 33 to write my first song. But I did finally write it, and I took action with it and made something of it. So I'm tickled with that.
And that you did. And the good news is there's probably more goodness that awaits. And for those who need to keep in contact with you when that good arrives, what's the best way for folks to do so? Best way is simply my website, combsmusic.com, COMBS music.com. On that webpage, you'll land there, and on the left side, you'll see my picture of my book, and on the right side, you'll see the picture of the cover of my CD, Rachel's Song, and right below them will be a little link that says buy from Amazon.com on the book and the CD. And that'll take you right straight to the page where you can explore all you want to about it. On the music side, you can probably listen to samples. On the book, I know you can hear me reading part of it to you. There are look inside features where you can read some of the first 2 chapters of the book are there.
and you can buy the paperback, or you can buy an Audible book, or you can buy an ebook. So there's different ways that you can get the book. And the CD, you can buy a CD, you can buy an MP3 download file of a song or the whole album. Or if you're an Amazon Music subscriber, you can just stream the album and listen to it. But right in the middle on my homepage, combsmusic.com, is a link that says play Rachel's song. And when you click on that link, you will be listening to the actual recording of Rachel's song that I made in August of 1986 with Gary Prim. Has not been altered, no mixing, no remaking or anything. It's the original song that I heard that night in 1986. And my email address is at the bottom of the page. It's just simply dave@combsmusic.com. But I love to hear from people. Tell me your stories and about how the music touches your heart. combsmusic.com is where you need to go.
Woohoo! That's what I'm talking about, indeed. So my goodness, sounds like 36-year anniversary from the wonderful Rachel song by the time folks hear this episode, indeed, baby. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. So you heard that right, folks. combsmusic.com. We're going to put a link to his site in the show notes. Be sure to check out his site, hear Rachel's song, buy some copies of his book, and heck, even audio book, and continue to gift the good gift that God has blessed Dave with to share with the wonderful world, folks. That's right, indeed. Any parting words before we close up shop, sir?
The best parting word I can give is to thank you, Dom, for the privilege of talking with you on your podcast. This has been a real pleasure, and I've enjoyed it, and I feel like you have, and I hope your audience will as well.
Thanks a bunch for tuning in and setting aside some of your time to listen to this wonderful podcast, Going North. If you really enjoyed what you heard, do me a solid and share this with your network and someone that you care about that would get something out of it too. And be sure to subscribe to hear more, and heck, even check out the backlog if you would like, because there are hundreds of episodes to choose from, and they just keep getting better and not butter.